News First. Main sponsor.
LB Yasa Isuru, unparalleled rewards for a trusted deposit.
Good evening to you. You're watching Prime Time News. I'm Chaturang Haporachi. This is News First, where the people come first. Before we head into the stories in detail, let's first take a look at the headlines.
Prime Minister says he won't resign. Protests continue demanding presidents and prime ministers' resignation.
Mahinda Rajapaksa ගෙදර යන්න කියලා කිව්වේ. තමන්ගේ පවුල ඇවත් තරම් ගෙදර යන්න කියලා කිව්වේ. මේ පළාත් සභාවට නෙමෙයි. මේ රටේ පොදු මහ ජනතාව. අපි මේ අරගලයට සහාය දක්වන්නේ ගෝඨාභය පන්නලා ඒ පුටුවේ තවත් පබයක් වාඩි කරන්න නෙමෙයි. ලාවකලන්න සල්ලි ටික කරුණාකරලා දෙන්න අපිට.
Sajid and Anwar demand government to listen to the people's voice. SJB launches protest march from Kandy to Colombo. Gas prices go up by 1,860 rupees. Authorities want 100% price hike for electricity. IMF calls on Sri Lanka to strengthen monetary policy and increase taxes. Sri Lankan athlete Yupun Abeko sets a new Asian sprint record.
Those were headlines. On to those stories in detail now. Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa says he won't resign from his position. He made these comments at a meeting between the government's parliamentarians and provincial councillors at Temple Trees.
The accusations that are being leveled against us are not new. Various accusations are made at different times. We worked for this country. That's the truth. That is why they can find fault in us. We ended the war. We moved forward and didn't take a single step behind. Remember that a group that didn't receive attention when we ended the war has now gathered at Golface. Issues must be resolved through discussions. We don't have any issues with the protesters, but there are a few who exert pressure on financial institutions to avoid helping our country. They are disrupting the daily life of the people. That is not a good thing. All of you requested me not to resign. I won't resign. Don't be afraid. They can remove me, but I won't resign. I will not give up my position out of fear and run away. What is the president's decision?
The
government had the support of more than 150 MPs in parliament. The government's strength dropped to a certain extent after 39 MPs decided to sit independently. Therefore, the president decided to prioritize solving the political crisis. He invited all parties in parliament to join the government, but he didn't receive a favorable response. If they had given their support, a government could have been established, whether we call it an interim or a unity government. Since the president didn't receive a favorable response, he decided to offer positions to an intellectual group. I feel that the people received what they wanted. If this problem continues to go unresolved, and if a no-confidence motion is to be brought forward, the president has clearly articulated in his letter to the chief prelates that he is ready to form an interim government. There's an agreement in parliament to change the government. He doesn't oppose that.
The cabinet had yesterday decided to table the 21st constitutional amendment to parliament based on the 19th and 20th amendments. The decision was made on a proposal tabled by Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. The cabinet had also decided to appoint a parliamentary select committee tasked with preparing a bill by taking into consideration the draft amendment and the proposals tabled in parliament.
Protesters say they don't agree with the stance of the President and Prime Minister.
මහින්ද රාජපක්ෂට ගෙදර යන්න කියලා කිව්වේ.
We want Mahinda Rajapaksa to go home. Take your family and go home. This is not a provincial council. This is the general public. Mahinda Rajapaksa, who has made Sri Lanka another Somalia, is now trying to create playhouses everywhere. Those playhouses can't overwhelm us. We're not supporting this struggle to replace Gotabaya with another scarecrow. As university students, we are fighting for the rights of the people.
අපි මේ අරගලයට සහාය දක්වන්නේ මේ රටේ ජනතාවට ජීවත් වීමේ අවමයිතිය ලබා දීලා කියලා. මෙතන ඉන්න ඔක්කොම ලීඩර්ස්ලා එක ලීඩර්.
All of us are leaders here. There is not just one leader. Don't assume that this was organized by one group. Every protester at Golface is a leader.
මේක කරනවා කියලා එහෙම නෑ. Golface දෙන හැම එක්කෙනාම ලීඩර් කෙනෙක් මාත්‍යෝ හොඳටම කරා. ගෝඨාසයන් හොඳට කරා. ලාවත්තලන්නේ සල්ලි ටික ආපහු.
Give us the money that you stole from us. We will teach you and your brother what leadership is.
We
won't give up on our struggle. The youth here won't give up until these crises are resolved. He can't just leave. He can't leave until he returns the money that he looted from the people. Otherwise, he can go to jail. Regardless of who comes into power, they will not arrest those doing wrong. They party together at night. If we understand that, we will be able to reverse the actions of politicians. We will forget the politicians and learn to live peacefully with the people. If this platform for the people's voice collapses, politicians will make use of it because they hate us now.
People are continuing to turn up at Golface Green opposite the President's office, calling for the resignation of the government. Nisal Suryarachi joins us from the demonstration site, where protests have been running for 18 days.
Protesters are gathered here at the President's office as well as Golface day after day after day. As you can see behind me, there are volunteers here addressing the people who have come here. There's a heavy police presence here, but so far the protests have been peaceful, and these people have gathered here from all parts of the island, and they're here demanding the government to call it quits. I'm Nisal Suryarachi reporting for Newsfirst.
Government, especially the Prime Minister and the President, stepped down. I think it's quite obvious that this is what the people want, because people voted them in with trust, and they have clearly broken that. The person that comes into power next is actually someone that the people trust. It has to be the people's choice.
Farmers joined the demonstration at Golface after a protest march that began at the Fort Railway Station. Alumni members of the University of Colombo also marched towards the protest site today. The young crowds that marched from Kandy arrived at the protest site this afternoon.
ගොඩාවේ රාජපක්ෂ අපි වගේන් හෙව්වේ විරුවෙක්. හැබැයි අපිට හම්බුනේ නරියෙක්. ඒකට ගොඩක් දුකයි. සා මහින්ද රාජපක්ෂ මහත්තයාට කියනවා ඔයා යුද්ධය ඉවර කරපු නිසා.
We are disappointed. Mahinda Rajapaksa is saying that we must respect him because Sri Lanka won the war during his regime. If you had left after the 5-year term, the people would be worshipping you today. They would have respected you. The Rajapaksa family has ruined our country. Please leave. You will have to pay for the sweat and tears the people are shedding. Leave without ruining our country even more.
Some university lecturers donated books to the library that has been set up at the protest site. We will win this struggle. These people are joining the struggle with knowledge and not using bombs or clubs. The book is the strongest weapon. We will back them towards victory.
A protest is being held opposite temple trees calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. The protest site has been dubbed as the Minor Gogama. Members of the Mahasangha joined the protest this morning.
මයිනකෝ ගමේදී මට මතක් වෙන්නේ තණ්හාය ජායති සෝකෝ තණ්හාය ජායති භයං තණ්හාය විප්පමුත්තස්ස නත්ති සෝකෝ කුතෝ භයං ගෝඨාභය මහින්ද ඇතුළු.
We want to tell Gotabaya and Mahinda, who are greedy for power, to let aside that greed and resign with dignity without being sad or afraid. Otherwise they will be stripped of their clothes and sent home.
දත් නැතුව තමයි මහත්තුරු දෙන්නට යන්න වෙන්නේ.
The Colombo Additional Magistrate yesterday rejected a request by the Kolpiti police to remove the protesters outside temple trees. The police had also parked buses on the pavement to obstruct the protest.
අපි ඇවිල්ලා ඉන්නේ අරලිගම මන්දිර ඉස්සරහට පුලන්න වරෙන් එළියට. තමන්ගේ චැලෙන්ජ් එක කිව්වනේ දුවන්න උනත් පුළුවන් කියලා. මෙන්න ඇවිල්ලා ඉන්නවා. පුළුවන් නම් එළියට එන්න.
අපිට ඔයාලා එපා. සිංහලෙන් තේරුම් කිව්වනේ එපා. ඒකින්ද කරුණා කරලා යන්න නම්බු පිටින් යන තාමත් chance එක තියෙනවා.
Protesters claim that one of them had been attacked last night.
මොනාරුනොත් ඔයා වගේ යන්න ඕනේ පුද්ගලිකව. ඉස්සරහට ගන්න මේ මෙතන හරිනේ ඉවරයිනේ ප්‍රශ්නේ. සනිකර මිනිමරුමක් වෙන්නේ. අද දිනේ එක්වරම රාත්‍රී 11:20ත් 11 මාරත් අතර මෙන්න මේ මෙතන තියෙන ට්‍රක් රථය එකවරම අපේ සහෝදරයෙක් යට කරගෙන පිටිපස්ස පැත්තට ධාවනය කරා. මේකද ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදය, මේකද ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ නීති ආධිපත්‍යය.
A protester has filed a complaint on the incident with the Kolpiti police and the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka.
Protests are being held in other parts of the country as well, demanding the government to resign.
Young citizens held a protest at the Gota Gogama protest site at the Anuradhapura town. A protest was also held at the Gota Gogama protest site in Gaul. Protests at the Gota Gogama protest site in Kandy entered its 10th day today. A protest was organised opposite the residence of State Minister Siripala Gamlath today. Farmers in Polonnarua had participated in the protest, demanding solutions to the fertiliser crisis and the rising cost of living. Tensions arose when police attempted to disperse the protesters. Lawyers are also adding their voice to the ongoing protests against the president and the government. One protest was held in Homagana.
Rajapaksa regime में Gota, Mahinda, Basil.
The Rajapaksa family, including Mahinda, Basil, Shamal and Namal, must resign. The dollars that they looted must be brought back to the country. All businesses established by the Rajapaksas and their allies must be seized. They must be sent to jail. Lawyers in Badulla held a silent protest under the theme "Let's respect the people's sovereignty."
ජනාධිපතිවරයාට කියනවා තව තවත් මේ රටේ
We are telling the president to avoid playing with the people's sovereignty. We have had enough. We wish to tell the police and the tri-forces that the people are unable to live in the country for which all of you gained freedom. Don't follow wrong directives. When you are sent to jail for doing that, the officer who gave that directive won't be with you.
ඔබ වෙනුවෙන් පෙනී සිටින්න ඒ අනදුන්න පුද්ගලයා එන්නේ නැහැ.
Let's cross over to a quick commercial break. More news on the other side.
This country is a land like no other. This is literal paradise.
They have this mental prison where they think, okay, so if the Rajapakshas leave, there won't be anyone else to govern the country. We must break that prison.
Why it is different is, I think for the first time there's this awakening of the national consciousness.
This is a moment in which Sri Lankans are transforming from voters to citizens.
News First with the people.
Welcome back to the news. Litrogas Lanka Limited says it has decided to increase the cost of gas cylinders.
Litrogas says the cost of a 12.5 kilogram gas cylinder will go up to 4,860 rupees from midnight. A 5 kg gas cylinder will now be sold for 1,945 rupees and a 2.3 kg gas cylinder at 910 rupees. The decision made by Litrogas on April 22nd to increase the cost of a gas cylinder up to 5,175 rupees was reversed by the government's intervention. Litrogas chairman Vijitha Herat told reporters that Litro suffers a daily loss of 250 million rupees. He said there is no alternative to address the problem except for increasing prices.
Amidst the mounting issues in the country, the shortage of medical supplies has jeopardized the lives of the people. The shortage of medicine has severely affected patients in many areas. Now, the Health Ministry has decided to revise medicine prices once in 2 weeks. Many patients spoke to our cameras today on their plight.
වෙන්දර මාස 3කට දෙනවා මාස 3කට එකපාර අද බෙහෙත් නැහැ මාසකට දුන්නා ආයි මාසෙන් එන්න කිව්වා.
වෙන දැන් මාස දෙකකින් බෙහෙත් නැහැ. එන දවසක් කියන්න බෑ කියලා පිටින් ගන්න කියලා ලියලා දුන්නා. පිටින් ගන්න ඉදියන්නේ නැහැ ලක්ෂ 3.90ක් වෙනවා බෙහෙත් මාසෙකට ගන්න. මොනවා කරන්නද?
ඉතින් ටීචර් ටික දුන්නා මාසෙට. ඒ විදියට
පිළිදාල නැහැ ගෝ. ඊට පස්සේ ෆාමසි පහකට ගියා පහෙම නැහැ. සල්ලි තිබුණත් බඩු නැහැ ගන්න. සල්ලිත් නැහැ. අපි අනාථ වෙලා ඉන්නේ. පුරාකෝපෝ දෙන්නෙත් නැහැ. අපි අනාථ කරලා තියෙන්නේ. මිනිස්සු ඉවරයි ඉතින්.
පුගඩු අමාරුව කියලා තමයි දැන් මේ බෙහෙත් ගන්නෙ. දැන් මේ බෙහෙත් ටිකක් තව තියෙනවා ෆාමසියෙන් ගන්න. ඒ ටික ගන්න ඕනේ. ඉතින් සල්ලිත් නැහැ. දැන් ගණන් වැඩිනේ.
තුන්ඩුවක් දෙනවා ෆාමසියෙන් ගන්න. ඉතින් ෆාමසියෙන් ගන්න කියන රුපියල් 3000යි 4000යි බෙහෙත්. ඒත් දැන් අපිට ජීවත් වෙන්න තියෙන අරගලෙත් එක්ක කොහොමද ෆාමසියෙන් බෙහෙත් ගන්න අපි?
උදේ ඉඳලා මෙතන පොලිමේ හිටියා. ඉඳලා අතෙන්ට අර එහා තැනට යවුවා. එතන එක බෙහෙතයි දුන්නා නිද්ද ගන්න එක ෆාමසියේදී.
හාතියට උරණ කරලා එක පෙට්ටියන්නේ ගිය හැරෙත් දුන්නේ එක පෙට්ටිය මට ෆාමසියෙන් ගන්න සල්ලි නැහැ මහත්තයෝ. මං හයින්ටක දුප්පත් මිනිහෙක්. ඉතින් මං ෆාමසියෙන් කොහොමද ගන්නේ මේක?
The Ceylon Electricity Board has requested for a tariff hike of 100%. The Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka said that it would not approve such a hike, but it said the request would be studied for consideration. In the meantime, a shortage of fuel is continuing to aggravate the woes faced by the people. The crisis has existed for several weeks with no end in sight.
Tensions arose at a filling station in Gampola after kerosene was not sold to customers. The filling station had received kerosene after 3 weeks.
මංකොල්ල කාලා මහජනතාවගේ සල්ලි කාලා හැම දෙයක්ම කාලා උන් ගෙනියන්නේ අතිසපෝ ජීවිතයක් ගෙනියන්නේ මිනිස්සු අද මහා පාරේ ආවිලා උඹලාට බැරන තොලංගිලා ඵලයල්ලා කරන දේ ඵලයල්ලා උඹලාට සාපයක්ම වෙනවා සාපයක්ම වෙනවා
ආවම මැසිම කැඩිලා කියලා කියනවා දැන් බලන්න අපේ කරුණේ තමයි
Long queues to purchase kerosene were seen at a filling station in Hatton. The Ceylon Petroleum Corporation says 40,000 metric tons of diesel are being unloaded at the Kolon Nava storage terminal. CPC chairman Sumit Vijay Singh has said another tanker carrying 90,000 metric tons of crude oil is to reach the country today.
Sri Lanka is facing a severe economic crisis that has affected the people. Is there a way out of this problem? News First takes a closer look.
Central bank data shows that a US dollar was selling at 346.49 rupees today, but a US dollar had been selling at 353 rupees at the Bank of Ceylon today. On the 8th of March, the central bank decided to allow the exchange rate to float. The rupee has depreciated by 75% since then, resulting in the cost of goods continuing to rise. Will Sri Lanka receive the support of the International Monetary Fund? A Sri Lankan team held talks with the International Monetary Fund in Washington recently for a relief package to tide over the crisis. At the end of the talks, the IMF said it will support Sri Lanka by working closely with the authorities on the economic program. But the IMF has stressed that Sri Lanka should move towards ensuring debt sustainability. The IMF's acting director for the Asia and Pacific Department has said Sri Lanka must tighten its monetary policy.
The most important issue is to find a credible and coherent macroeconomic strategy that addresses the key risks in the country. And this would include, on the fiscal side, revenue-based consolidation strategy that increases the ability of the country to raise revenues and to address most critical spending needs. Monetary policy has to be tightened to keep inflation in check. We see a need for a flexible exchange rate. Fiscal policy has to be formulated in a way that protects the livelihood of the most vulnerable. The taxes should be paid more by those that are well off. We have received a program request from Sri Lanka, and we have had very good, fruitful technical discussions on preparations for the negotiations with the authorities over the past weekend. Debt in Sri Lanka is assessed as being unsustainable. We therefore welcome the authorities' intent to engage with their creditors. The requirement for fund lending will be that progress towards debt sustainability, and the first step on this process has been taken by the authorities.
Is China saddened by Sri Lanka's decision to obtain IMF support? The IMF says it aims to support Sri Lanka to ensure that the country restructures its debt and increases government revenue to guide the country's economy to a favorable position. They would then offer Sri Lanka a loan to overcome the current crisis. But China's ambassador to Sri Lanka, Kee Zeng Hong, has said China is sad that Sri Lanka went to the IMF and defaulted on its debt. The ambassador has said that the decision to restructure debt will definitely impact future bilateral loans.
China's stance is such that they have lent money to many countries and that they cannot let one country have its debt restructured, as it will then affect the other countries as well. They have instead proposed to give another loan in order to repay the existing loan. The finance minister will provide more information on this to Parliament in due course.
Why did Sri Lanka obtain most of its debt from China? The Colombo port city, Hambantota port, Matala airport, Nelumpokuna tower and several expressways had been built using Chinese loans. Does China expect Sri Lanka to obtain more loans to pay its existing debt? Wouldn't Sri Lanka have to pay a higher interest as a result of obtaining more debt? What is India's stance? India has continued to support Sri Lanka's efforts on debt restructuring. India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had met with the Sri Lankan delegation in Washington on the sidelines of talks with the IMF. The Finance Minister had called on the International Monetary Fund to provide immediate relief to Sri Lanka's balance of payments crisis. India's Finance Minister has said China must be treated just like any other creditor once talks begin to restructure Sri Lanka's debt. However, the International Monetary Monetary Fund is yet to agree to provide a rapid financing instrument to Sri Lanka. Economic analysts say the IMF might support Sri Lanka for a long-term economic program. However, Sri Lanka's decision to restructure its external debt has now taken center stage in its economic crisis. Rating agencies are now downgrading the country in terms of its capability to repay its debt. Standard & Poor's Global Ratings has reduced Sri Lanka's ratings in terms of repaying its foreign currency debt to a level of selective default. Reuters reported that the rating could drop even further to level D, meaning default, if Sri Lanka doesn't pay its debt even after a 30-day grace period. The Moody's and Fitch rating agencies have already downgraded Sri Lanka. Shouldn't authorities find a feasible solution to restore the country's economy? Will this crisis be resolved through various political strategies that are taking place?
Professor Shantha Devarajan is a member of the Presidential Advisory Team on Debt. He says a change in government will not affect talks with the International Monetary Fund.
Does a change in regime affect the success of the IMF program? We have been cognizant that there might be a change in regime, and we have been looking at what possibilities there are to maintain the same program that we are negotiating all the way till the end. Since we've already had discussions with the opposition leaders over the last 3 or 4 months, and they basically endorse the same program that we're working on, I think there's a good chance that whoever is in charge when the program is negotiated will endorse the program.
The World Bank has agreed to provide $600 million in financial aid to Sri Lanka. Chio Kanda, the World Bank's country manager of Sri Lanka, said $400 million will be provided under the first phase. She had given the assurance during a meeting at the President's office. Trading at the Colombo Stock Exchange dropped today in its second day after reopening following 16 days of inactivity.
The all-share price index, which measures the movements of the overall market, was recorded at 6,905.37 points. It dropped 8.1% from yesterday. The S&P SL20 index, that tracks the performance of 20 leading trading companies, had dropped to 2,122.94 points. The drop was 9.8%. The Colombo Stock Exchange was on holiday from the 8th of April and was due to reopen on the 18th of April. But a 5-day trading halt had been declared until Sunday due to the crisis in the country.
Let's cross over to another commercial break. More news on the other side.
පුරා ගලන මේ සතුට සුරක්ෂිත කරන්නේ ඉස්ලාම් ඉන්සයිට්. ඉස්ලාම් ජීවයයි ජලයයි ජීවිතේ.
යස ඉසුරු පිරුණු තැනක් නෙමේක. ලොකුම සල්ලි තියෙන තැන. අපේ සල්ලිත් පරිස්සම් නිසා.
ඉහළ ප්‍රතිලාභ සමගින් විශ්වාසනීය තැන්පතුවක්.
LB Yasa Isuru, unparalleled rewards for a trusted deposit.
There's hope in clear vision. There's hope in action. There's hope when you listen to the people. We, the people alone, can stand up for hope, for our future. Yes, we can. The method, hope in action.
Welcome back to the news. President's Counsel Ali Sabri took oath as the Minister of Justice today. He will now serve as both the Minister of Finance and Justice. The Samagi Jana Balavegaya launched a protest march from Kandy to Colombo today.
The protesters, led by opposition leader Sajid Premadasa, engaged in religious observances at the Temple of the Sacred Tooth and obtained blessings at the Sri Natha Devalaya. Most Venerable Niyangoda Vijita Thero, the Anunayaka of the Malwata chapter of the Siam sect, and Most Venerable Venerue Upali Thero, the Anunayaka of the Asgiri chapter of the Siam sect, were present. Opposition leader Sajid Premadasa then obtained the blessings of the chief prelate of the Asgiriya chapter of the Siam sect, Most Venerable Warkagoda Sri Yana Ratanathero. The Samagi Jana Balavega handed over a copy of the proposed 21st constitutional amendment to the chief prelate. Party activists and supporters then launched the 5-day protest march from the Candy Clock Tower. The protesters reached Maunalla today and will resume the march towards Galigamua tomorrow. The protesters, led by opposition leader Sajid Premadasa, continued the protest despite heavy rain.
The Samagi Jana Balavega and the National People's Power parties are insisting that an interim government won't satisfy the people. They say the political crisis can be solved only with the people's mandate.
The Samagi Jana Balavega or its affiliated parties will not come into power without the people's mandate. There are deals between the 225 MPs. They have neglected the 22 million people in our country. A no-confidence motion and an impeachment motion is not the same as bringing another government into power. We won't betray the people in any way. We won't betray the protesters at Goldface Green. But we are ready to take up the responsibility not by revealing the deals between the politicians or the ongoing fuel crisis. We will take up responsibility when we come into power through the people's mandate.
වගකින් බාර අරගෙන කටයුතු කරා. දැන් කොහොමද ඩීල් ආණ්ඩුවකින් ගහපු ඩීල් අන්තර් මොකද්ද කියලා කියනවනේ අන්තර්කාලීනකින්. අන්තර්කාලීනකින් හොරු වල්ලන්න පුළුවන්ද? අන්තර්කාලීනකින් පුළුවන්ද හොරා කාපු සල්ලි රටට ගේන්න? අන්තර්කාලීනකින් වෙන්නේ හොරු නොවන අයත් හොරු වෙන එක.
අප කිසිසේත්ම මෙම ජනාධිපතිවරයා මෙම පුටුවේ තබාගෙන යෝජනා කරන ලබන අන්තර්පාලනය.
We will never agree to an interim government in which Gotabaya Rajapaksa will be president. The people are calling for his resignation. It is clear that Gotabaya wants to remain in power regardless of the country's situation, the people's woes and the rising cost of living and the state of national assets. This government has led this country to uncertainty to protect their power. The President and the Cabinet must resign. An interim government must be formed in Parliament. An election must be held after that. This issue will not be solved unless we give the people a chance to choose a new government.
නව පාලනයක් ගොඩනගා ගැනීමට අවස්ථාවක් ලබා දීමකින් තොරව මේකට ස්ථාවර විසඳුමක් ලැබෙන්නේ.
Former Parliament Deputy Speaker Chandima Virakodi is also of the view to call for elections. The temporary solutions will not be accepted by the people, and I am one of them. We have repeatedly noted that the people have lost faith, but those warnings were disregarded. The destruction is such that it cannot be rectified. We must call for elections. We might win or we might lose. There may be personal disputes, but this is not the time for that. At this moment, a step must be taken for the country and let the people decide on power.
බලය පිළිබඳ තීන්දුව ජනතාවට ගන්න අවස්ථාව දෙන්න.
In your international news update, Twitter has accepted Elon Musk's offer to purchase the company for $44 billion.
Business magnate Elon Musk had purchased Twitter at $44 billion, with each share at $54.2. To buy Twitter, Elon Musk had obtained $25.5 billion in loans and contributed $21 billion of personal equity. Twitter had initially suggested that it intends to resist the offer. Analysts had said repaying the loans obtained by Musk to buy Twitter could cost the company about 20% of its annual revenue. Elon Musk has said he he wants to make Twitter better by adding new features, defeating spam bots, and authenticating all humans. He already owns 9% stake in Twitter, worth $2.9 billion.
In your sports news, Sri Lanka's Yupun Abekon has set a new Asian record in the 150-meter sprinting event at an athletic meet in Italy.
Sri Lanka's Yupun Abekon clocked 15.16 seconds to finish first in the 150-meter sprinting event in Italy. He also set a new Asian record for the event in the process. The previous record of 15.35 seconds was set by Japan's Yoshihide Kiryu in 2017. Yupun Abekon was the only Sri Lankan to compete at the Diamond League athletic competitions in 2020.
Gets it from CJU, the others out of the blocks, but
that's all the news we have for you this evening. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Chaturanga Haporachi. This is News First, where the people come first.